Hello again. So, last time we ended with the victory of the CCP in the Chinese Civil War, the Chinese Communist Party. So, as China seems to be on the road to being unified, and so suddenly civil war happens and then the communists win. So, this video will address. Can't talk. This video will address why the CCP won during the Civil War. So one of the key reasons is that Mao's prestige, and not just his prestige alone, but the CCP's prestige as a whole, grew steadily. There's a key event that you should all remember, and that is the infamous Long March beginning in October 1934, in which Mao emerged as a leader. Communist soldiers and party leaders numbering around 100,000 were forced to march 12,500 km across 11 provinces. It was a grueling march because if we look at the map below, we see those pink areas, and some pink areas have cross. The light pink areas are former CCP enclaves, Soviets and stuff. The ones with the cross on them are the ones that have been completely eliminated by the KMT, the nationalists. So there comes a point in which extinction is imminent, so Mao decides to lead everybody on a long march to go to the Yan'an Soviet, to Yunnan. And he just basically, it's a long escape to kind of avoid the KMT and avoid the KMT and avoid complete destruction, and at the same time waging guerrilla warfare against them. So the communists set up the headquarters in Yunnan, and where the movement would grow rapidly across 10 years for the following 10 years. So Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the KMT, the nationalists at the time, wanted to preserve a monopoly of power, and he refused to accept the suggestion of a coalition government. The US wanted him to, but Chiang was like, no. In December 46, there were widespread student demonstrations in Beijing and Shanghai against the KMT government, given that the KMT was still imposing its authoritarian rule. The KMT failed to punish those who had collaborated with the Japanese during the war, and it was extremely corrupt, because the officials and officers who took control were basically corrupt officials, and sparked a rebellion in 47. And KMT appointed officials and commanders drawn from outside Manchuria to run the region, and this led to a number of factions within the party breaking off and going into opposition. And the secret police were also not very popular. They're basically the Chinese Gestapo. So given the KMT's poor reputation, the people were driven into the arms of the CCP. And the gold yuan note was introduced to replace the national currency, and which basically meant everybody everybody was encouraged to convert the currency, but then it collapsed and many people lost their savings. So basically the KMT screwed everyone over, not just through brutality, but through incompetent decisions. Chiang Kai-shek had assumed there would be a large-scale intervention from the US and China to drive out the Japanese, but no, the US bombed Japan. And it didn't work in his favor, because Chiang was hoping to manipulate the US into fighting against the CCP, but this failed horribly because the Japanese got bombed, and the US tried to broker a peace, but everybody said no, and the Truman administration was disappointed by this. And then the Civil War started up again from 46 to 49, and the US government severely restricted aid because he was extremely corrupt. Then by 1948, where the US finally realized that Chiang was crap, it kind of was too late, and the US just started a hands-off policy. Think about it, the US gave like millions and millions of dollars to Chiang, but the army wasn't modernized at all. There weren't any significant gains, and there was like no further funding. The war effort didn't continue, and suspiciously it still remained the same while the money just disappeared. And guess where it went to? Probably the pockets of many senior officers and Chiang himself. So the KMT forces were overextended and were vulnerable to counteroffensive by the PLA. So yeah, because they were managed by corrupt and incompetent officers, so the PLAs managed to just attrition them to no end, and they just died. And though the KMT army was much bigger than the PLA, the morale was very low, discipline was brutal, and many soldiers mutinied or defected. and it's basically falling apart at this stage. And many KMT soldiers were conscripts, and they were often roped together to stop them deserting. It's just It's just what's the term for it? Gangplank? No, that's not. It's just forcing them to take up soldiering. The surgeon rates were very high, and the CCP won lower class support and even support of KMT soldiers. They were guarantees by the CCP to the KMT soldiers of being well fed, because they legit couldn't be well fed in the KMT. They only had like congee, and they sometimes had to steal or even like frag their own officers just to get some kind of benefits. The CCP won the support of the peasants and the lower class and the proletariat, and then by 1927 there were thousands of CCP members, and many of them recruited from factory workers. Mao was in charge of the Peasant Institute, which had attracted so many peasants by 27. The White Terror was a huge blow to the CCP, but in terms of manpower, but it increased their prestige and it made them more favorable than the KMT, because they were basically massacred for just demonstrating against authoritarian rule and trying to take charge of their own future. The survivors established the Jiangxi Soviet and built support through land reform, i.e. taking land from richer landlords and distributing them to the peasants, but then it kind of the CCP leadership showed great resilience in surviving the White Terror, and then they did the Long March, and they managed to avoid extermination and extinction, and then it basically turned them into a legend. And when Mao became leader of the CCP after the Long March, he basically became a legend himself, and thus people had an icon to look up to. At the time, you could think of him as an equivalent of a Chinese Jesus, although it's a very brutal Jesus, as we know later. The people finally had someone to look forward to that actually promised the betterment of the people. Mao's moderation was better at building support. He taught the PLA and his force, the CCP forces, to just be good and not do anything to the peasants. Mao was chosen as the chairman of the Standing Committee of the Politburo in 1935 during the Long March, and the CCP united under his leadership. And as I mentioned, it was at Yan'an that Mao, and where the Long March ended, that Mao came on top. Cunning guy. The Rectification of Conduct campaign established his ideas as an official CCP ideology, and thus you could properly use the term Maoist instead of a communist or Leninist or Marxist. The Maoist was the legit thing now. So, and then the cult of leadership formed, and Mao, as I've said, became a Jesus of China. Mao was talented at adapting Marxist theory, because he originally tried to do the CCP's original aim was to get the proletariat, the industrial working class, but then it didn't work because there wasn't much industry in China at the time. So they turned to the peasants, and it worked. Here's a picture of Chiang Kai-shek and Mao side by side. The CCP broadened its support base by appealing beyond the peasantry, because many people were also fed up by the KMT's rule. So he cooperated with the middle classes, and Mao won support through land and education reform. So he basically became a Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. He advocated the Mars line, where CCP officials were to live among the peasants and learn from them, and in which he could prove to the people that yes, we are integrating, we are part of you, we are learning from you, we are one of you, and there's no need for alienation. He advocated the fair treatment of peasants, so any CCP members who abused peasants were to be harshly disciplined, and his 8 rules of conduct basically turned his rebels into a pretty substantial organized force. And he advocated that the peasants hold local positions, because in his ideology it was the upper class and the rich and the government that sucked, and they were manipulating the people. The CCP were able to take control of much of northern China due to the withdrawal of the Japanese and the fact that they were in rural areas where it was their territory, and the KMT was spread too thinly, and they were mainly focused on cities. The Red Army were better disciplined than the KMT forces because of the 8 rules of conduct. They got support, they got money, they got well fed, and morale was higher. And so he had control of many peasants, which meant a lot of farms, which meant a lot of food. So the Red Army played a more active role in expelling the Japanese than the KMT, so they gained support through this. The KMT was more focused on fighting the CCP during the Second World War and the Sino-Japanese War, instead of fighting the Japanese themselves. So again, this dropped support for the KMT to even further limits. The Red Army used guerrilla tactics and were aided by peasants behind enemy lines. So it shows that Here we see the big divide between the KMT and the CCP, and thus why they won the civil war was that the CCP got the support and assistment from the local peasants. They got morale, they got an organized force, whereas the KMT was corrupt. They lost the support, and many people just hated the rules so much. This was a mouthful and I couldn't speak in this video. But anyway, thanks for watching, you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.